Okay, so today I'm going to endeavor on the next phase of my arcade project. In my previous video, I replaced on my tank stick all the black colored buttons with colored HAP buttons, and I like the way that came out. The next thing I'm going to do is, I'm not real thrilled with the performance of the stock joysticks that come with the XArcade. I kind of feel like they have a bit of dead spots. They're not real good in the angles because they're only four-way joysticks. And so what I did is I did some research online, and I was going to replace them with HAP competition joysticks, which is what these are kind of a knockoff or clone of. But after doing some research and watching some videos online, I found out that after 2005, HAP was merged with a company called Suzu, and they started manufacturing the joysticks at the Suzu plant in China. Prior to that, they had been made for HAP by a company called Industrious Lorenzo, I believe it is, IL. And that was done over in Spain. From everything I read and found out about, if you got a joystick from HAP prior to 2005, it was made by IL. If you got one after 5, it was made in the Suzu plant in China. And they're nearly identical, but a couple differences. First of all, this is a actual IL joystick. It's called the IL Eurostick. And the big difference, they're almost identical to the HAP competition, except for the IL comes with actual cherry switches, cherry brand switches, which are supposed to be like, you know, as good as you can get. Also, the actuator here on the IL is a nylon type actuator, and the actuator on the HAP version is made of the same sort of PVC that the rest of the casing is made out of, and it's not as durable or effective in gameplay. The other thing is, if you were to pull the shaft away here and kind of look inside of it, you can see there's more nylon material in there, and that's not the case either, and that's covering the metal shaft. On the HAP competition made by Suzu in China, that's all, again, just this black PVC stuff, and it just doesn't have the same quality. So at any rate, I went with the Eurostick by IL. I got 2 of them. I'm going to replace the factory XArcades. One video I watched said that this shouldn't need any kind of modification to my actual XArcade. I should just be able to unscrew this one and screw this one. Another video said I'm going to have to hack stuff around, but that was for the HAP competition, so I'm kind of hoping that the other advantage of this one is that I don't actually have to grind my joystick cabinet on the XArcade at all to make it fit. So I'll find that out once I get inside. At any rate, I'm going to follow the same process I did last time, whereby we're going to flip this thing like this, and I'm going to pop out the rubber pieces covering the Phillips screws and take those 8 screws out of the back of my tank stick. So I'm going to pause the video for a minute while I do that, and then I'll show you the inside of the stick, inside of the tank stick, and we'll go from there. Alright, so as you can see, I've gotten the back off of my tank stick, and the next thing I did is I took some pictures real close up of the existing joysticks, and you can see that they're definitely different. These switches have these metal pieces that kind of bounce off the actuator as you move the joystick around, where these ones, the big square nylon piece here is what hits the switches. I don't know if you can quite see it, but these ones have these red buttons that are hit by the actuator never actually touches the buttons. It touches these metal pieces here, which hit the button, where this here is directly from the actuator, so to speak, as you move the joystick around. You will notice that the switches on all of the factory switches that come with the Tankstick only have 2 wires, as opposed to the switches on the average arcade system, which has 3. In my first video, I didn't know why or understand it, but I do now. I did a little more research, and you have a ground, and you have always closed and always open. So what that basically means is you won't use this one right here unless you want the button to always be depressed, basically, until you've pressed the button, which breaks the circuit. Or the other one, when you press the button, it makes the circuit. So usually you would have ground, and then to here, which is, again, when you hit the button, it breaks the circuit. Or makes the circuit. This one here you would never use unless you were having a button that has a situation where the switch is always on, or the system's always on, and then you hit the button to stop it, which you typically wouldn't use. So that's why I suppose XArcade, for their switches, which are actually their brand, you can actually see X Gaming on them, they just don't put the other thing off of it, because they're never going to use that. So at any rate, I'm going to do the same thing when I connect it up to here. I'll connect them up. Again, the one on the top will be the ground, and then the other one will be to the on. Okay? As you can see, they're just secured with 4 nuts with the screws coming out of the cabinet. It's going to be a little hard to work those on. I was hoping I could use a socket wrench, but unfortunately they're so close up against the actual base of the joystick and you can't really get a socket on them. So I'm just going to have to use standard pliers. Maybe some of these thingies might help, although I have a feeling they won't have the strength to really turn it, but we'll see. So I'm going to pause it while I work that out. I am going to take these wires off before I get started, because I want some wiggle room in there. So I'm going to take those off, but again, I took a picture so that I know exactly how to put them back on. And for the most part, on this side, all these are purple that go into the edges, and then all of the other ones are either brown or gray or brown or white. I'll get them on there exactly how I get them off of this one. So let me get started and we'll come back. Alright, so you can see I've worked off the wires. I used a pair of these needle nose to kind of pull the wires off from the base, because sometimes they get pretty hard stuck on there. Next, I just kind of start working through these. I am kind of using these so far, and they've been somewhat successful. I don't know if you can see that, but basically you don't quite have the leverage with the bent nose, but it is getting it. So I just got to kind of work through it little by little. So I'm going to do that on all 4, on both sides. This one's still got the wires on. And then I'll come back and show you what it looks like off. Alrighty, so I got off the nuts as well as the little lock washers that were underneath each on this first joystick. The next step will be to get off the little U-clamp that holds the shaft onto the joystick. The new one has the same sort of thing. I'll have to pop that off as well before I can pop this one in. I'm going to just basically use my pliers to try to work that off as such. Haven't done that before, so it might take a little doing. I'll come back in a minute. Alright, so I got the U-clamp off. Basically, just I put a screwdriver tip, just kind of pulled it to the left, and then with my needle nose grabbed it up. Okay, so now that I have the clamp off of the piece here, just basically popped it off the screwdriver, like I say. Basically the next step, and this is a little hard with one hand, but I'm going to reach behind. I'm just going to pull the shaft out. There's the joystick. shaft. So the next step should be just pull this guy out, just like that. It's all in one piece. You could take this thing apart and see the spring and all that crap inside, but I'm not going to do that. I'm basically going to just reassemble it. I'm going to stick the shaft right back inside, and I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to put the actuator back on, and I'm going to put the clamp back on, and that way I have a complete joystick in case I ever need one for something. Although I think I would just rather buy new ones. So here we go. So you can see the motions on it. I'll show you the difference here side by side. So a couple things to point out. First of all, the X Gaming one has a square base, as you can see here, where the IL has a rounded base. Now that might not seem like it matters, but it matters from a mounting point of view for sure, because as you can see here, the screws are right up against that thing there. So when you put the nut on, there's really nowhere to put a ratchet in there. You can't put a socket on there, but you totally could on the IL simply, because you have a totally clear spot for working on these, so it's definitely a better design. In addition, again, you have the cherry switches instead of the X Gaming switches. These are much better switches, and you can feel it. The different actuator, a nylon as opposed to PVC, and direct contact with the actuator to the switches, as opposed to using these crappy metal horrible things that over time get more and more weak and less precise. So that's it, and that's my old one. This will be the new guy that's going on there. It's gonna perform much better. So I'm trying to put it on. Alright, so now I'm going to pull the same thing. I got to take this little clamp off on the new one so that I can pull the shaft out, and then I can install it into my XArcade Tankstick. So I'm going to do that now. Alright, I got it off, so just like before, should be able to pull the shaft right out, like such. And the actuator should come off as well, I believe. Yeah, maybe it doesn't in these ones. I guess it stays in there. That's the difference. It's on the one that came with it, these are just loose pieces that came off, as you can kind of see. But on this one, that's all one piece that goes down into the shaft there. So that's another difference in the construction. Alright, so I'm gonna basically, this is the moment of truth, see if this sucker actually goes in here. Well, it looks like I actually lost one of my bolts. I'm gonna have to fish that out, but first I'm gonna check to see if this thing's gonna fit. Look at that. Perfect fit, no grinding, no chopping. Another good reason to get an IL stick instead of a HAP, Suzu HAP. Because all the videos I watched for putting in a competition stick said I had to grind my wood to make it fit. This one fits perfect. So my next step is to look for that screw that fell through. I didn't realize it was just loose. So I got to put it back in so that I can screw this thing back on. So the next step is to stick the shaft back through. As you can see, I've done here. I have to also line up each of these holes, make sure that the screws come through, and then on the other side, they the wood is actually squared out for the bolts to come through, and not spin as you turn on your bolts. So the next step will be for me to put my bolts and lock washers back on, and then I'll secure my joystick, because it's going to be kind of hard right now because it's kind of got a spring. If I try to put the shaft pin on first, these are going to keep popping out on me, so I'm going to put those on first. Alright, so as you can see, I've worked my nuts and lock washers back on. Probably the hardest part was getting the stinking bolts to stay in place and put into their little square holes on the back of the panel, on the front of the panel I should say. So I don't know, it might be a good idea to just put some like masking tape or something over them before you even unscrew the joystick. So I'm going to try that on the other one before I even do it, because that'll hopefully hold them in place so that I don't have to deal with that on the second joystick. Now I'm going to stick the shaft through, but this thing is spring loaded, so I'm going to have to use one hand on the joystick, pushing it through, and another one to kind of put the cotter pin back on. So I can't really hold the camera and do that at the same time, but basically my plan is to put one hand on the joystick, pushing it through, the other one over here, pushing that on, and then once I have it through, I'll kind of place the cotter pin on with my finger, and then I can remove my hand from the back of the joystick to come over here and kind of help me maneuver that on. So I'm going to start that now. As you can see, I'm looking at my picture that I took to know exactly where to put the wires back on. Now, I had a situation where some of these wouldn't go right on there. They're kind of really loose. So I just took my needle nose and squeezed them before I put it on a little bit so that it would be a nice, snug, snap-on feel. And then I kind of roll the rubber back over it to prevent shorts. So I've already done these two. I'll do this one. Next I'll do that one. Oops, but I put in the wrong one. Remember, I'm only going to use that one and the one on top. So again, I pull the rubber back, pop this back on here, and that should be good shape. There. Okay, I'm going to continue the rest of them and I'll show you when it's done. So like I say, I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to squeeze it a little bit. Not a lot, just enough to make it so that it'll go onto the cable where it belongs, a little bit smoother. And then it'll click on. See, it kind of clicks in place. And then again, I put the rubber piece over it again to prevent wires from touching each other. So two left, here and here. Here and here. Okay, so my diagram shows I should have a white and a purple going there. So I'm going to do that next. So just like that, I now have my first one installed. I really like the red dust cover that comes with the IL sticks. They match their color to their joystick, where the Suzu Hap ones, you'd have a color joystick, but you'd still have a black washer. So it would be that same black washer. And if you like the IL stick, but you don't like the washer, when you take off your other ones, these washers are the exact same size. So you could choose to keep the black one and use it with the IL stick if you went with the IL stick and didn't like the red washer. But I really do like it. I think it adds a nice color and look to the stick. I can already feel the difference here. The actuators just feel wonderful, where these ones just kind of feel clunky. So it sounds different too. Kind of hear it there. Here it just sounds dead on. Just really nice. So I'm looking forward to playing with that, especially games like Street Fighter, things like that, where precision matters. Alright, so time to start the second one. Alright, so as you can see, I've learned from my lessons. Took some black electrical tape and put it over each of the screws so that when I take the nuts off on the other side, the screws don't fall out, because that was probably the hardest part, was getting them maneuvered back in and keeping them in while the joystick was loose. So hopefully this helps me out. So I've already got the wires off and I loosened the screws just slightly. I'm going to go ahead and take the nuts off the rest of the way. Getting these wires over here off were really difficult because it's right up against the cabinet. I didn't have that issue over here because you had buttons in the trackball here. But this one was a real bear, and I actually bent the piece a bit, but I don't think it's damaged too bad. This one here, as you can see, it had to be bent to get it off of there because it was backed right up against the wood. But I don't think it's damaged. So anyway, I'm going to work on getting the nuts off, and then I'll come back. Alright, so I got the nuts and the lock washers off of all four corners. Now I got to pry off the cotter pin. Again, I didn't show it last time. I'll try to show it a little better this time. But basically, you see, they kind of got these little notches in them. I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver, and I'm just going to kind of press it up against the shaft a little bit. until I got a little bit of clearance there. See that? I'm just going to keep working it. And I should be able to now grab my needle nose and just work it the rest of the way. And it may pop when I do it. It might, you know, go fall in, but that's no big deal. I'll find it. Alright, so I got the cotter pin off, and now, just like on the other joystick, I'm going to reach behind and grab the shaft. Little piece fell off here. I'll put that back on when I reassemble it. And now this should just pull right off. And this time, my bolts stay in place because I have them taped with the electrical tape on the other side. It's great to learn from your lessons. Next I'll put the new one in. Now normally I wouldn't say to put wires on first, but because of how tight that was, I'm going to put that wire on first so that it's not a bear. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my diagram that I took the picture of so that I know which wire I have to do, and I'm going to put it on now to make life easier, which it should. So it should be a brown wire, which should be the one that's all bent up right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that on right now where it's going to need to go, right there. It's loose, so I'm going to have to squeeze it a little bit. Alright, the good news is I got it in, no problem. And I got that wire on. Bad news is the screw still fell through. Just the pushing of the joystick into the slot caused the screws to fall out on the back. So I get to do that nightmare again. So let's do that. So here's what I was talking about. They're kind of notched. I don't know if you can see it. They're kind of notched so that when you put the screw in, this part here keeps it from spinning. You see how it's got kind of a square end at the end there? So you kind of got to see where that is, work it in there, and then hopefully get it in there enough that you can start putting a nut on there. The sheer force of the black piece here pushing on it kind of acts almost like a spring, so it keeps wanting to come back. So you might want to do one screw a bit and then do the next one, etc. Alright, so I got them in, and that wire is still connected because I put it on first. And now I'll go ahead and put on the rest of the connections, then I'll put the stick back through the shaft. Alright, so I got all the wires back on like they're supposed to be. So now I'll take the shaft and again pull it in from underneath. And push it through like so. And then I'll have to do the same sort of thing where I push this in and then slide the cotter pin on. So I need two hands to do that, so I'll show you when it's done. And there you go. So I got the cotter pin on. My joystick is now on. And as we can see, it works. So that's it. Next I'll put the cover back on, plug it in, try it, make sure everything works. Should be good.
Alright, so there it is. Final product, so to speak. I got both of my IL Eurosticks installed perfectly. Not a difficult job, I'd say total about 45 minutes to an hour. Taking my time and doing the video, probably a little less if you weren't doing all that. But not too difficult, everything went right on. Like I said, the Eurosticks fit perfectly into the cabinet, into the wood of the XArcade, so I didn't have to grind anything with a Dremel or anything like that, like some of the other videos show when you're putting in the HAP competition sticks. So that's a huge advantage as far as I'm concerned. I haven't actually tried them yet, but just the feel of them, the sound, the way they click just sounds way superior to the ones that were on the XArcade, so I'm really excited. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something in case you want to do the same. My last mod that I'll do, I plan to do next week. or later this week, I'm putting in a spinner right here. So I'm going to get a turbo spinner, Turbo 2 I think it's called, spinner, and put it right here for games like Arkanoid and things of that nature. So I'll post another video with that once I video it. That's it for now. Bye.